everyone, and welcome to our series featuring our friends from VikingsTerritory.com, where we continue to get ready for the NFL season. I'm Tom Moore, and in this segment, we welcome Carl Knowles to our 2014 Minnesota Vikings preview segment on VikFans.com. Carl, how are things in Indiana today?
Pretty good, Tom. Nice and sunny today. Pretty warm weather, so anytime we have a warm day, I like that.
I bet if we check back in December, you won't say the same thing.
Nope, I won't. I'll be inside watching football by the fireplace, so I'm all right either way.
No problem. Well, Carl, I mentioned that you're in Indiana, but I understand you have an interesting NFL responsibility outside the Minnesota Vikings coverage. It appears you also cover the Indianapolis Colts. What's going on there?
I write for Naptown's Finest. That's a Colts website, and then I'm also going to be contributing for Colts Authority. Colts Academy is the new website. Colts Authority is edited by Kyle Rodriguez, so he's bringing me on board. So I'll be doing some film breakdown and analysis throughout the year. We'll be breaking down some film for Colts Academy.
Well, I mean, you have to be honest with us. If we find ourselves fortunate enough to be in the Super Bowl and we end up playing the Colts, who are you rooting for again?
The Vikings. I bleed purple, so yeah. I'll be rooting for the Vikings.
Fair enough. Then in that case, we wish you well with the Colts book coverage.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, Carl, obviously Viking fans are most optimistic about the new defensive scheme and the philosophy being put on the field in 2014. And what we're counting on you to help us understand is what we should expect. Are you ready to give it a go?
Yeah, let's give this thing a shot.
All right. Well, let's start on the defensive line, where this is the first time that I can remember that we've had such depth in a long time that allows these players to rotate during the game and keep them fresh without seeing a huge drop-off in talent that's going to the bench. But is there one player that you'd expect to be a leader of this unit?
I like Everson Griffin stepping up this year. I think he's going to be a beast to stop, and I think he's going to rack up some sacks this year and bring a lot of pressure off the edge. So I'm looking for Everson Griffin to have a big year.
Well, you know, he's an amazing athlete, and he's always been great in coverage when he's dropped back in a linebacker position. But are you at all concerned about him being a full-time defensive end, and especially holding up against the run?
I think he's athletic enough that with his speed and his quickness that I think he's going to be a factor in both the run and the pass. So I'm not too worried about Everson Griffin. So I think with Sharif Floyd and a couple of other guys, Linville Joseph next to him and Robinson on the other side, I think he's going to have some opportunities to make plays.
Yeah, it's got to be scary, though, because it seems on obvious passing downs in the preseason, they're taking your two ends. They're taking Robinson and Griffin. They're pushing them to the tackles, and then we see, Barr come in and Wooten on the other side. That's got to be a scary thing for opposing offenses.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to line up at the quarterback position and look at our front. So I'm pretty excited about the potential of what havoc we can wreak on the quarterbacks this year. So I think it's going to be fun to watch our front.
Well, we saw so many defensive fronts in the preseason. How many of those three-man or even five-man fronts that we saw in training camp will the fans experience during the season?
I think you're going to see a mixture of a lot of things. I think Zimmer's going to be pretty hands-on on the defense, and I think he's going to mix it up quite a bit. And I think the Vikings have a unique personnel grouping, and I think they've got some athletic people that are well-rounded that can do a lot of different things. So I think Zimmer is definitely going to take advantage of that, and he's going to keep some offenses guessing, that's for sure. But with Everson Griffin and Robinson, we can drop those guys back into coverage, like you said, and like Howdy Cole can get after the quarterback too. So I think Zimmer's going to have some pretty nice tools to work with this year to mix things up, and won't be that typical 4-3 front that we normally see for people rushing the quarterback. I think it'll be a real mixture of things happening.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's going to be nice for a change of pace to just see the variation. Before it was just the same vanilla defense all the time, and I think that's what fans are excited about is let's be more aggressive versus it seemed like we were backing up on our heels, playing a zone coverage, and now it really is stick tight to your man and get some plays done.
Exactly, and I think if you mix things up a little bit, it's going to help your secondary quite a bit. I kind of like our secondary that we have, and I think they're going to get their hands on some balls this year. And we're not used to seeing that, but I think this year things are going to be a little bit different, and we're going to be more of a turnover machine, I think.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And as we still look on the line, Sharif Floyd flashed a little bit better than he did last year so far in the preseason. And I'm curious, Carl, from your perspective, what do you expect out of him in this first year replacing Kevin Williams?
Well, he's a first-round draft pick, so my expectations are pretty high for him, and I think he's going to have to prove that he's got a motor that's not going to quit and that he can play for 60 minutes. So that's what I'm looking for. I think he's got the tools and the talent to be good, but is that drive and that motor there? And I think the same can be said with Everson Griffin, but I think that I've got confidence that Mike Zimmer's going to solve those issues.
It's funny, last year when we didn't hear much out of Floyd, you'd hear the questions of, well, it must be the short arms he's got. I mean, at a defensive tackle, do the length of his arms matter that much?
I think it helps when you're getting up into the passing lane trying to knock some balls down, and it's always good to have length on the arms when you're tackling, so we're just going to have to see if he can overcome that and be disruptive with short arms.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, as we stay with the defensive line, we've seen some pretty good things out of Corey Wooten, Shamar Stephen, Tom Johnson, even Scott Crichton in the preseason. But of that group of four, which would you say you would expect the biggest impact from this season for the Vikings?
Well, that's some pretty good depth there that most teams don't have the luxury of going that deep in their lineup. So I'm pretty excited about that. I like what Crichton brings to the table, but he's got some players in front of him, and he's a rookie. I really like the Stevens kid. I hope he makes the football team because I think that he can be an impact player down the road. The defense as a whole, I've not really seen a real standout. I think this is going to be a very team-oriented concept, and I think sacks are going to be, spread out, and I think this is going to be more of a no-name defense that gets the job done.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's one guy that we haven't talked about. He's hard to miss. It's Linval Joseph, and he's returning for week one after that off-field shooting incident. And I'm curious, what do you expect about his conditioning? Is he going to be strong enough to play an entire game in the first game of the season? And what have you seen in him during camp and preseason that indicates he can finally be the answer we've been looking for to plug the middle like Pat Williams used to do?
Well, he's definitely going to help, that's for sure. We didn't take a step backwards when we made that decision in the off season. I think that was a smart move, and I think he's going to help us out a lot as far as conditioning. I'm not sure if we need him to be on the field all the time, kind of like Jasper Brinkley. I think there'll be certain packages that he's going to be helpful to us in. So as far as conditioning, I don't really see that being a big issue. I think he's a professional and he should be ready to go. He's definitely going to be a key plug in the middle to help our run defense.
Well, you mentioned Jasper Brinkley, and that leads me into a question that I had for you about that Mike linebacker spot. We've seen Jasper Brinkley and the Audie Cole and even Chad Greenway during the preseason. Who do you think gets the nod as the starter there?
I think that Jasper's probably going to get the start in the middle in the base defense, and Greenway will probably play some in the Mike in the middle, but I look for Audie Cole to get a lot of playing time. I think he's got some length, and he's a smart, heady player, and that's what Zimmer's looking for. And I think you'll see Audie Cole, line up a little bit at the mic too.
Yeah, I like the idea of the quarterback having his head on a swivel, wondering where the next guy's going to come from.
That's right.
Well, we talk about this linebacker group, and a lot of people worried about Chad Greenway last year. He looked out of place, lost, and maybe a step slow, but he seems rejuvenated during this preseason. Is he playing that much better, or is the scheme simply a better fit for him?
Well, it could be a change, and I think this defense needed a change in philosophy. I think that all of the players are going to be responding quite a bit differently than what they did last year, and I think Greenway is a smart player. I don't think there's any question he's a heady veteran, and he's played well in the past, and I think he's capable of playing well again. I think scheme probably has a lot to do with it, but I think just the focus and the philosophy of a new coaching staff is really going to drive these guys.
As we drop back into the secondary, you talked about how you really like what you see. But one guy we've watched for a while is a guy with all the seemingly having the tool sets, the speed, coverage capabilities, Josh Robinson, but he struggles to make plays on the ball. Does he have what it takes to be a solid man coverage guy who can also create turnovers while he locks down receivers? He's
a guy that, when we drafted him, kind of really flew up the radar during the combine with his quick 40 time, and I think a lot of people went back to the tape and started looking at some of his speed and athleticism and some of the negatives that were showing up on tape it's easier to dismiss that after the combine when you see some freakish, athleticism. Kind of buyer beware at the combine when some of these high risers, start shooting up, just before the draft, just because of some speed. Josh came from a small school, so it might take him a little bit of time to develop a little bit. He certainly looked lost at the nickel spot last year. It seemed like he was picked on all the time, and hopefully he can turn that around. But I think he's probably a little more suited to the outside. But I think I kind of like some of our other corners a little bit better.
Speaking of a guy who's not out of place in the nickel is Captain Munnerlyn. He seems really strong right now. And what does he bring to this defense?
Well, I think he's going to bring some energy, and I think he's going to be right there in the mix, getting his hands on the football. And I think you got to be aggressive enough to be able to make some plays. And I think he's been around the league, and so he brings some intelligence and some experience that we just didn't have there since Winfield had left.
You mentioned Winfield. I saw Munnerlyn line up on a blitz package in training camp, and he reminded me a lot of Antoine Winfield the way he came in there.
Yep. I think last year we had a real hard time turning the corner, turning the page, and moving on from the Winfield situation. And even the, Williams wall breaking up, I think that took a real toll on this team emotionally. And I think this year we're ready to turn that page and move on. And I think Captain is going to be a big part of that. Just his ability to make plays and get his hands on the football is going to be a big change. I'm thinking he's going to lead the team in interceptions this year.
That's a nice thought, because in previous years leading the team in about 1 or 2 interceptions, so that gives us something to look forward to. Tell you what, when you're looking back in the safety position, obviously Harrison Smith is solidified there, but are you expecting Robert Blanton, who the coaches seem to want to start there, to take that spot, or would you expect Jamarcus Sanford or Kurt Coleman to start in week 1?
I'm not surprised at all by Robert Blanton starting. I knew that just by his size and the length and the fact that he's just a very smart player, and the fact that he got a lot of experience last year as a nickel corner, that's kind of tough for a safety to step down there and do that when you're a young safety. So I think he's a much better player for what he experienced last year. And so I think he's going to be really good and lined up next to Harrison Smith. So he's kind of my favorite to win it. Certainly not the most athletic guy on the field, but I think he's going to be smart and he's going to be in good position. And that's, I think, what Zimmer is all about this year, is knowing your assignments and being where you're supposed to be. I'm hoping that Exum makes this football team, because I think later in the year he might get a good look.
Okay. Well, it's funny, because after the Viking team has been the worst in the league in creating defensive takeaways for what seems like forever, this Viking team has been an interception machine in the preseason. And when you look at the defense as a whole, what is it about the scheme that makes them so much more opportunistic this year?
Well, I think they're just a little more energy and a little more aggressive, and I think that's just the nature of their head coach rubbing off on them. I think they're willing to go out there and lay it all on the line. I think we've got to keep Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes on the football field. That's, those guys have to be healthy this year for us to continue to be that turnover machine. Just the aggressive nature of the coach, I think, is, to answer your question, is rubbing off on these guys. And I think they're pretty talented, really. I mean, we've got some, 4 guys on the defense that have been picked in the top 40, so it's going to be pretty sweet when it's right.
So. I'll tell you, I like the sound of it, and as we kind of close out our conversation today, and I'm going to ask you to kind of look in summary of this defense and ask you, what is your best guess on where this defense ranks at the end of the year? And I want to warn you, we got people who are a little bit, on edge sometimes, so please don't say 31st.
There's only one way that this defense is going to go, and that's up. And I think Zimmer is the biggest reason for that. I like the talent that we got. We got some good young building blocks to work with Everson Griffin and Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes and Anthony Barrs, Reese Floyd. I mean, really? I mean, that's some pretty good standout capabilities. And then you mix in some of the quality veterans that we got, Brian Robinson and Greenway and Linville Joseph and captain, and then, you throw in Robert Blanton and Cole that are quality depth players that have gotten a taste of what it's like to be in the starting lineup, and they've had a little bit of success at a young age. So I like the chemistry. I just like the group, that personnel that we have. There's some minimal respect right now from some of the national people, but I think I'm very optimistic, and I think that we're probably going to wind up being around 15 to 12th ranking on the defense. When I look back and see what Mike Zimmer did with the Bengals in 2008, they were horrible for 4 years, and in 2008, he took them to 12th ranking after a 27th ranking the year before in total yards allowed. So I think you're going to see that kind of improvement.
Well, I'll tell you what, we all share your optimism, and you're in good company because Vikings color analyst Pete Bursich also picked this to be a 12 through 15 defense, so we know he's seen a defense or two in his time. And, Carl, we really appreciate you helping us break down this 2014 edition of the Viking defense. And I want to remind our fans to catch all of Carl's stories during the NFL season on VikingsTerritory.com, and you can also follow him on Twitter, at Carl Knowles, VT. Carl, again, thanks for joining us tonight on VikeFans.com.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Tom. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet. Take care.